Please welcome Heather Tinsley-Fix, Senior Advisor with AARP.
Hi, everyone. I am Heather Tinsley-Fix, and I'm coming to you from AARP, where I lead employer engagement. I am going to be talking to you today about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging in two contexts. And those are the multi-generational workforce and the future of work. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Okay, so as many of you know, the workforce is more generationally diverse than it has ever been. Currently have 5 generations in the workforce, and yet we don't tend to think of age as an element in our diversity and inclusion strategies. So I'm going to be talking today about why we should and why age diversity matters. I'm going to make a couple of points first about demographics and longevity. The first thing I want to talk about is the increased amount of longevity that we've been enjoying over the last 100 years. You can see that from 1900 to 2020, which is a period of 120 years, we've gained an astonishing 33 years of life expectancy on average. It may not seem like much, but to put that in context, we only gained 6 years of average life expectancy between the 17th and 18th centuries. And of course, that makes sense if you look back on it, given that our advances in medicine and our understanding of how to stay healthy are so much greater now. But in addition to living longer, we're staying healthier for longer. The other thing I wanted to point out about demographics is that birth rates are declining. This is common across most OECD countries. And in the United States, for the first time in US history, adults 65 and over are projected to outnumber children 18 and under by 2035. So you've got a double combination of people living longer, staying healthier for longer, and this translates into members of the labor force who can continue to be vital and contribute significantly into their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have fewer 18 to 25-year-olds who are coming into the pipeline. Well, what this spells out for our workforce demographics is that they will remain generationally diverse. This can be actually good news for us as organizations because research has shown that age diversity improves team performance, both in terms of the relative productivity of both older and younger workers who are on a mixed age team, and also on teams performing creative tasks, complex decision-making tasks, anything that's complex and needs different perspectives. Age diversity contributes highly to that. And we're not entirely sure why that is, but potentially it has to do with what we call knowledge spillover, where knowledge is shared freely among the team members, and they need that culture of belonging and safety to be able to share that knowledge. But that seems to be the magic with regard to age diversity in teams. Now, looking at age diversity in terms of the future of work, I want to talk a little bit about the skill landscape that we're looking at now. This slide won't surprise you. No job is safe from automation, even though COVID-19 has really upended a lot of things, and we're not out of the woods yet with regard to that, obviously. Automation is not stopping. This is from a report by McKinsey Global Institute in 2017, and they took a look at the work activities of 800 different occupations, broke them down into different work activities, and they analyzed how many of those activities could be potentially automated. And what will not surprise you is that you can see here at the top of the list, predictable physical work, data processing, and those kinds of rule-based tasks are ripe for automation. But even down here below, where you're talking about more human types of interactions, managing other people and applying expertise, even a small portion of those jobs could be able to be automated. And so what are the skills then that we as humans continue to contribute, and are they important? Well, the good news is, yes, they are. There is an increasing importance on how to find people with what are called uniquely human skills. Now, we all have these, but they tend to accrue over time and through experience. So older workers tend to be quite rich in these skills, and they're often the kind of skills that are passed down through in-person experience, mentoring. This is the kind of tacit, unspoken knowledge that's hard to document. This is from the 17th annual PwC CEO survey, and you can see that 5 of the top most important skills that CEOs value are also the hardest to find. So you can see here leadership, emotional intelligence, problem solving, creativity. Again, these are the higher order cognitive and social emotional skills that will remain important, especially as more jobs become automated. And the great thing about that in terms of age diversity is that when you have older workers and younger workers together, these kinds of skills can really be developed. But moving forward in terms of understanding the implications of the future of work and how it's changing not only how we work, but the makeup of our workforce, what are the implications for equity and belonging? And I have 3 points that I want to make. And the first is that this longer life will require us to lead a more nonlinear, multi-stage career life. In other words, our career will be much less like this slide, which is, by the way, I'm indebted to Heather McGowan for this set of slides. I encourage you to check her out at the website below. But how it used to work is that we would have sort of 3 periods of our lives that were distinct from each other. There was no blending. So you have, say, the first chunk of your life is spent in getting educated. The next significant chunk of your life in applying that education to a specific profession and moving up a ladder in a sort of a single or maybe a couple different professions. And then a hard stop, a bright line between stopping working and retiring, where you're resting and recharging and enjoying your life until, and that usually was pretty short because our life expectancy wasn't as long as it is now, and it was possible to save easily for that kind of retirement. However, if we're living to be 90 plus, we're going to have to work longer, and we're not going to be able to sustain the enormous long working lives at the pace that we tend to work now. We're going to need periods where we lean out to reskill and lean out to care for others, both our children and our elders. We're going to need to have flexible ways of moving in and out of the workforce in order to enable this longer working life. The implication of this trend is that we have to start thinking of our career trajectory in waves, successive waves, rather than in a single ladder. And I realize this is a big shift. This is a really difficult thing to get one's head around, particularly when it comes to evaluating equity, because we tend to evaluate equity within the context of titles, right? Why aren't there more Black female CEOs? And we need to continue doing that. That's absolutely vital. We can't not pay attention to that. But as organizations flatten, as titles become less important, or if they do become less important, how do we preserve that intent of equity? What if eminence or significance in a role is not tied to title? What if compensation is not tied to title? We'll have to come up with new ways of rewarding and recognizing talent and test those in order to accommodate this new sort of circular, nonlinear career journey. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that we're all going to be novices repeatedly throughout our careers because we're all going to need to reskill frequently. I hate to use the word continuously because it sounds exhausting, but we're going to have to reskill frequently. And that leads me into my second point, which is we're going to need to work to learn rather than learn to work. Again, I'm indebted to Heather McGowan for this slide. Training and upskilling needs to be continuous. You can see here the old model that she outlines with the 3 distinct periods, which is no longer really viable. And she identifies what she calls an emerging faulty logic model, where you have a single break to reskill in a 40-year career. And she argues that that's not really going to be sustainable or possible, especially given how fast skills change, the skills we need, and we're hiring for change. So we're going to have a lifelong learning, blended sort of learning and working environment. Additionally, our identity, which tends to be tied to a job and a job title, as I was mentioning before, that's going to have to shift. If you ask my 7-year-old son, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you do? What do you want to do when you grow up? He wouldn't be able to answer that question accurately because probably half of jobs that will be available to him then haven't been thought of yet. So we have to sort of slowly start to let go of this notion of a crystallized job title and think of our professional identity more as the kinds of core skills we have, the kinds of value we're able to create, what we're interested in working on in terms of information and ideas. So again, implications here are certainly that we're going to have a blurred line between working and learning this has some potential exciting possibilities for equity. For example, the diminishing importance of four-year degrees could help level the playing field to create better pathways for non-traditional candidates. And we can see this happening already, particularly in coding and boot camps and technology professions. So micro-credentialing and stackable credentials, other forms of skill proof will become important. And that could help sort of address some previous equity issues. The other thing that could be possible is that we could see a way of increasing a sense of belonging by, again, moving away from a sense of a person's accomplishment or what they're proud of, away from a title and more towards what value they're creating and what projects they're working on at the moment. The last thing I want to point out with regard to future of work and age diversity and longevity in the context of equity and inclusion is that unfortunately disparities continue to persist. We know this. In the context of longevity, the gains are not uniform. You can vary in terms of either viewed through the lens of geography, zip code, or through the lens of race and gender. The gains are not uniform. They can vary by as much as 20 years. And so we need to really address that because access to opportunity is so important in terms of addressing previous inequities. And access to good wages, to good health care, long-term financial planning, these are the things that, these are the factors that tend to influence and increase your longevity. And jobs are a foundational way to build that access, to build that equity. So diversity at work isn't just good for business, which we already know, it's also good for society. And if COVID has taught us anything, those two elements are interrelated, right? So business and society are intertwined in ways that can't be undone. And so diversity and equity are more important than ever now. The other quick point I wanted to make on this slide is that in terms of access to opportunity, is that we have started to rely more on algorithms to help us sort and rank and match candidates to job openings. And so outsourcing those decisions to algorithms is something we need to be carefully, we need to scrutinize carefully. There are ways to still use those platforms and get in touch with me, by the way, at the end if you'd like to. I have some material on that. There are ways to do that, use the platforms and still be vigilant about the potential effects for bias creeping in, but it's something we have to take into account. So just quickly to recap, we're living longer and staying healthier for longer than ever before. We're going to need to have a flexible approach to our career trajectories where we have periods of learning resting and earning or working. Though automation continues and will continue, humans are more important than ever. We're not going to stop being important in terms of pushing the envelope and making judgment calls and breakthrough innovation. So that's good. And I would argue that age needs to be part of our thinking about diversity and inclusion. It's the one aspect of identity that we all share. And it's one that we all participate in and hope to participate in, obviously, for as long as we can, right? And so I just want to wrap up by saying thank you again. I'm really looking forward to answering your questions. I'm going to be joining you live to do that now. It'll feel like now. So anyway, thank you again so much, and let's get to the questions. I'm glad to be back with you, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions. And a couple of them have already come in. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at those in the chat window here and answer them. So the first question is, what suggestions do you have to support older generations who have not grown up with technology woven into their lives, both professional and personal, and maybe struggling with this learning curve? So that is a great question. There is a persistent myth, I think, that older people are bad at technology. And I always like to remind people that the boomer generation is the generation that built the internet, right? And all of the technologies that sit on top of it have come later. So I'm not sure that, maybe the technologies of today, the most current ones we use, older people haven't grown up with or hasn't been woven into their professional lives. But if you are working with an older adult and they are struggling with the learning curve, one thing I would encourage you to talk about with them, or for you as an older person to realize, is that everybody can learn no matter how old you get. It's not something that diminishes with age. And so you might have to take it a bit more slowly. I have definitely heard from older people that they take longer to learn a technology, but they learn it much more thoroughly than some of their younger counterparts. So I think it's just a question of making sure that you approach it without fear, with a positive sense of being able to learn. And the last thing I'll say too is that many of the technologies today, including Zoom, for example, and Microsoft Teams or Slack or any of the collaboration software applications are pretty, they're engineered to be very easy to use, like the iPhone, for example. So those are the kind of suggestions I would give. And I would also sort of push back a little bit in the sense that I think older people are more conversant with technology than you might imagine. Okay, second question. How can people in a multi-generational workforce foster and tap into the value of reverse mentoring? I love this question. There are so many cool stories about pairing older and younger workers together and having them learn from each other. I know at Dell, there was a program specifically designed to pair leadership with younger people so that the leadership could learn about social media specifically. And it was great for both parties because the leadership, the older people were able to learn from the younger ones about social media, but the younger people were able to have access to that leadership and to that wisdom. And so I think reverse mentoring and really sort of bidirectional or two-way mentoring is exciting. The way to approach it, I believe, is, you need to have a culture. I think I mentioned this in the presentation, of safety, because you don't, want to have people hold on to knowledge and not share it. And so you also want to make sure that you position it as, again, like having a growth mindset in your culture that everybody can learn from anybody, right? So I think then it's just a question of how you leverage your existing mentoring programs to pair people up. But anyway, get in touch with me if you have examples of this, because I love to hear these kind of stories. Okay, see, next question. Why is the older generation being the first to go when it comes to cutbacks and layoffs, in particular because their salaries are larger? And company leadership thinks it's cheaper to let them go and then hire a younger person for less salary. And how do we upend this existing framework? Well, it's a highly relevant question right now, right? So the older parts of the workforce have been affected just as much as the younger parts of the workforce in terms of COVID and layoffs and furloughs. However, research from the Urban Institute shows that when an older worker is laid off, it takes them much longer to get back into the workforce, and only about 10% of them recover the salary that they had before they were let go. So it is definitely an issue. I think the way to upend the framework is to continue to move towards performance-based and skill-based pay. As I was talking about in the waves, not ladders slide, how do we sort of break apart title from compensation? And then another thing I'll say too is that when you have an older worker with a lot of those soft skills or those uniquely human skills I mentioned, if there's a way that we can start to actually value those to get a sense of what they contribute to the bottom line of an organization, then you can see that while an older worker's salary might need to be higher based on their needs or the position, that you may be getting like double your money because you're getting not only the skills that they're applying to the job itself, but also these other skills that are sort of have a hidden contribution to the bottom line and to productivity. So that's what I would say too. Oh, another question. Do you think there's an issue though that we are having to work longer and the idea of retirement is slowly becoming less of a reality? Yes, that's certainly true. I've heard this from our leadership before. It's sort of a funny way of putting it. I've seen the future of retirement and it is called work. But hopefully we can start to design ways for people to phase into retirement so that they can stay active in the workforce, but not necessarily keep up that same pace. Hopefully we can reimagine new ways to retain older workers flexibly. There are a number of models out there, like bringing them back as consultants. I do think that, retirement is something we need to have. We have to have a sense of being able to periods of rest. But the need to just, or the ability to just stop and then not work for a long period of time as we are living longer is probably not possible anymore. And most of the people that I talk to who have retired, they'll come back
back to us and say, or they'll say to me, I retired and I was really looking forward to it and I didn't want to work anymore. And then after 6 months, I was so bored, I thought I really would like to come and back and do something, whether it's volunteering, whether it's a passion project. So there are ways to stay active in a working capacity that don't necessarily have to be that full tilt. So that's, again, I would love your perspective on that. I would love to hear from you on any of the things I mentioned in the presentation. And I'm glad to be with you guys. It's good to hear your questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care and stay safe, everyone.